if its believers aren't unified, okay? And unity requires a couple things, and we started last week by talking about wisdom. We've got to be wise if we're going to be unified. And tonight, we are going to talk about being mature. When we talked about being wise, we said that all human wisdom, insight, perspective, I wrote that twice, that's weird. Anyway, perception was the other word I was looking for. There we go. All of those things together, though we are incredibly intelligent people, cannot fully reveal the truth about God. God has to reveal things to us. But we also said that even though Paul says that we shouldn't rely on the wisdom of man, God designed and redeems human wisdom. So he wants us to use our intellect and our ability to study and understand things. So we do want to be wise, and we do want to be mature as well, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. And we're going to frame tonight's conversation under this question: am I immature? Okay? So everybody ask that together. Am I immature? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I've got some thoughts on it. So, you should have your Bibles open already to 1 Corinthians 3. Let me do that myself. I will get there. And we're actually going to start reading in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. Let me get there. When I'm talking, I can't think. Here we go. So chapter 2, verse 14 says, "The natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him, and he is not able to understand them, because they are spiritually discerned. The spiritual person judges all things, but he is himself to be judged by no one. For who has understood the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ." It's one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible, if I haven't said that to you already. Chapter 3, verse 1 continues this topic, okay? "But I, brothers, could not address you as spiritual people, but as people of the flesh, as infants in Christ. Verse 2, "I fed you with milk, not solid food, for you were not ready for it. And even now you are not yet ready, for you are still of the flesh. For while there is jealousy and strife among you, you are not of the flesh. You are behaving only in a human way. For when one says, 'I follow Paul,' and another says, 'I follow Apollos,' are you not being merely human? What then is Apollos and what is Paul? Servants through whom you believed, as the Lord assigned to each. I planted and Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. Now according to the grace of God given to me, like a skilled master builder, I laid a foundation, and someone else is building upon it. Let each one take care how he builds upon it, for no one can lay a foundation other than which is laid, which is Christ. Now if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's work will become manifest, for the day, capital D, will disclose it, the day when Jesus returns, because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. Now if the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. Do you not know that you are God's temple, and God's Spirit dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. For God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. Now let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you thinks that he is wise in this age, let him become a fool, that he may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is folly with God. For it is written, He catches the wise in their craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile. So let no one boast in men, for all things are yours. Whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or the present or the future, all are yours, and you are Christ, and Christ is God's." All right, so that's the whole third chapter, and we're going to ask a couple questions tonight about being spiritually mature. So you guys get the picture, right? Paul wants to teach the Corinthian believers deep things. He wants to get them into the deep water of theology and understanding who God is. But he can't, because they're immature, like they're fighting and bickering and all this stuff, and so he calls them spiritually immature. So the first question, so we'll say, am I immature? Here's the first thing about spiritual immaturity. This is the first sign that you may be immature, okay? Spiritual immaturity is the absence of spiritual wisdom, all right? So we'll define what it is by what it isn't, all right? Spiritual immaturity is the absence of spiritual wisdom, and that's why he says in verse 1, "I, brothers, could not address you as spiritual people, but as people of the flesh, as infants." In verse 2, "I fed you with milk, not solid food, because you weren't ready for it. And even now you're not yet ready. You're still of the flesh." So when I think of like this passage, like the Paul trying to like teach these guys and these ladies some things, I think of like the dumb blonde kind of stereotype, right? Like Paul wants to teach them like really deep things. Sorry, blondes in the room, okay?
Those jokes are always about blonde girls. So.
Yeah, that's right. They're all about females for some reason. I don't know why. But anyway, Paul's like, I want to teach you deep things about God, and they're like, IDK, I don't know. So anyway, have you guys heard the one about the blonde with the thermos? The thermos, right? So she went to work, okay, and she sees her coworker. Sorry, Steph. Just look at her. Right now, your hair is very blonde with the light from the sun coming into it. So, anyway, this is not Steph. This is some other blonde person who may or may not be female. I will try to use gender-neutral words. She goes to work. Her coworker has a. Can't do it. It goes to work. For the sake of my own sanity, I'm going to have to say she. I'm sorry.
Say he.
Or he. I don't know if I can say he. I just default. They. There's more than one personality in there. He goes to work. Okay?
Wow.
His coworker has a thermos, and he's like, "What the heck is that thing?" And his coworker says, "It's a thermos. It keeps hot things hot and cold things cold. All right? It's a thermos. It insulates." He's like, "I gotta get me one of those." So he goes out and buys a thermos and comes back, and his coworker's like, "Oh, it's cool. You got your own thermos. It's like the same color." And he says, "What you got in there?" And he says, "I've got coffee and a popsicle." All right. How about this? What do you call a smart blonde?
Dumb.
A golden retriever. There we go. Okay. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen who are blonde. By the way, your intelligence has nothing to do with the color of your hair, okay? We'll just kind of clear that out of the air. Anyway, Paul wants to teach these Corinthian believers deep things, and they're acting like that ditzy blonde, kind of like, everything's just going over their head. They don't quite grasp it. Now listen here. Ditzy and airheaded, immature Christians are the kind of double-minded people that James actually talks about in the book of James. He says that if you don't have faith, you doubt, you're like a wave of the sea that's driven and tossed by the wind. You have no momentum of your own. You're completely controlled by the way the wind blows. And furthermore, a spiritually immature person who's like a ditzy blonde is the person who's unaware of the kind of danger that exists spiritually. 1 Peter 5:8 says that the devil, your adversary, prowls about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. There's spiritual danger out there. And these kind of people that are more interested in fighting and quarreling about which leader they follow and things like that, they're like that. So here's our evaluation question, okay? I'm going to give you guys a test tonight as well. So check one, yes or no. Do you understand what you believe? This is the test of whether or not, for this particular point, whether or not we're spiritually mature. Do I understand what I believe? And I've heard it said that to test whether or not you truly understand something, you need to try to explain it to your grandmother. Okay, so it's not like a grandmother's can't understand things. That's like, can I fully understand it to the point where I can explain it in detail so that my grandmother could understand it? Like, think about like trying to explain how a computer works to your grandmother. Okay, like that's kind of the picture. Okay, or blondes. You can try to explain it to a blonde too. What if your grandmother is blonde?
To be a blonde.
Ooh. Conundrum. All right. Now here's the deal. Okay, here's the deal. To be spiritually immature, to be right here where you lack spiritual wisdom, is not necessarily an indicator that you're like sinning, okay? You're not necessarily like in sin because you lack spiritual wisdom. As a matter of fact, we're all immature infants when we are first saved. And Paul says that. He says, before I couldn't give you meat, the metaphor of the deep thing, so I had to give you milk. But then he says, even now you're not ready. So there's a difference between being a new believer who struggles to understand things, or even as an older believer, sometimes it's difficult to understand deep concepts from the Bible. That's not when we talk about the sin side of this, which we're going to talk about next. That's a little different than just lacking wisdom. We can be spiritually immature and not have the kind of wisdom that we should. However, when we're in that spot, we can't stay there. Okay? I can't be content to not know some things. I gotta always be learning more. I always gotta be pursuing to understand a little more deeply the gospel. You guys with me on that? Okay. So that's number one. Am I spiritually mature? Spiritual maturity is the absence of spiritual wisdom. Here's the sin side of that. Okay. To be spiritually immature is to be unteachable. To be spiritually mature is to be unteachable. He says again in verse 2, I fed you with milk, not solid food. You weren't ready for it. Even now, you're not ready. You're still of the flesh. For while there is jealousy and strife among you, you are not of the flesh. You are behaving in only, or it's a question, sorry. Are you not of the flesh? and behaving only in a human way. To be a Christian for a long time and still be in this place where you don't really understand this whole Christian thing. You're just kind of doing it because it's what you're supposed to do. You go to church. You maybe even help out with ministries. You might even tell your friends, like, oh, Jesus is great and stuff. But, like, you don't really know any more than that. And you're not willing to learn any more than that. That's where we start to have a problem. And actually, this is what Proverbs says, okay? He says, the fear of the Lord, Solomon writing says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. He says, fools despise wisdom and instruction. Again, in verse 32 of chapter 15, he says, whoever ignores instruction despises himself, but he who listens to reproof gains intelligence. This is my favorite one. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates reproof or being corrected is stupid. How many of you were not allowed to say the word stupid when you were a kid? Am I the only one? Okay, because stupid was like a word that was like a really harsh word. So like I call up Richmond stupid, and I got yelled at. So, but the word stupid is actually the Hebrew word bar, B-A-A-R, in Latin. But it means to be brutish or senseless, and it kind of carries this idea of cattle grazing. So can you picture like cows or sheep or something on a hill and just kind of like grazing? Like that's kind of the image, okay? But it also implies something else. It's not just that you lack the knowledge, it's that there's a stubbornness. There's an arrogance. It says, whoever hates, Whoever hates, it's the last one. Whoever hates reproof is stupid. Whoever, ignores instruction despises himself. This is what we're talking about when we say you're unteachable. Like people, they see things in your life and they come to you and they say, hey, I see this, you need to change. Or, your Sunday school teacher or your youth director or somebody tells you to change something and you're just like, no, I don't want to do that. This is my life. I can do what I want with it. Now we're here, okay? So here's our evaluation question. Are you eager to be taught? And by taught, I mean corrected. Not just like, am I willing to learn new things, but am I willing to take somebody's advice and say, you know what, I need to make a change because I'm doing something wrong. Are you eager to be taught? If you're not, there's a good chance that you are spiritually immature in this way. We can actually add a second question to this, and let's look at the text in verse 18. He says, where's 18? Let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you thinks he's wise in this age, let him become a fool, that he may become wise. And not a fool like in these verses. The fool is the person who says, no, I don't want to understand. The fool in the sense of, I'm going to say I actually know nothing, and I want to be willing to be taught. Like I want to humble myself to the point where I say I don't know anything, and I'm going to choose to learn and accept the wisdom and insight from somebody else. All right. So that's the second thing. Right. Am I spiritually immature? Spiritual maturity is the absence of spiritual wisdom. It's also being unteachable. Number 3, spiritual immaturity causes divisions. And so Paul says, you're saying I follow Paul. Another person says I follow Apollos. They're picking their favorite teacher here. Okay, so Paul came and planted the church. He taught them about Jesus. There was this huge, movement from the Jews and the Corinthians and the Greeks and the Romans and everybody else who were there that were joining the church. So Paul leaves, and now Apollos comes in and is teaching, and now there's divisions coming up, and people are saying, I think Apollos is a better teacher than Paul, so I'm going to listen to what he says, and I'm not going to listen to what Paul says. All right, they're picking like their favorite teachers in a way. So there's 3 ways that we can understand causing divisions. All right, so spiritual immaturity causes divisions. Number 1, because it values its own opinions. Spiritual immaturity causes divisions because it values its own opinions. Here's some more Proverbs for you. I'll just throw these at you. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. And then this is a verse that you probably could all quote to me. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him. He will make straight your paths. Don't be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. This is the picture of somebody, in the second passage, who doesn't only want to express his own opinion and only want to pick and choose the different teachers that he's going to listen to. Spiritual immaturity is not... hang on. Oh, that's what I was going to say. So, sometimes we have a tendency to say, like, as I get more mature, as I get more knowledge and understanding, like I can be more and more independent. Like I can say, I don't need as much instruction or as much discipleship or whatever as I used to. But actually, when we come to understand spiritual maturity, it's kind of like the more you know, the more you need to know, right? Like, how many of you play instruments? Okay, How many of you play sports? All right, sports and instruments, pretty much everybody represented here. How many of you like to draw? How about that? Get some more people, more hands up, okay? I think everybody got to raise their hand at least once, right? All right, cool. That's kind of like what we do. We give trophies to everybody on the team, right? Anyway, anybody who practices that kind of a discipline, you would probably acknowledge that the better you get, the more you're like, man, I could really still improve some more, right? Like you look at the great musicians or the great athletes or the great artists, and you're like, man, if I want to be like that, then I got to work so much harder. I got to work so much harder. That's kind of the way it is with spiritual maturity. It's not about becoming more independent. It's about becoming more dependent. We want to not value our own opinions above the teachings of the Word of God or what other people are teaching us. So spiritual immaturity causes divisions because it values its own opinions, but it also values its own passions. And this is the passage that Nathan brought us to earlier, right? This is not the one. Never mind. I had the other one later. Sorry. What causes quarrels? What causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? And the verb there within you, the preposition there within you, he's actually communicates that it's not just interpersonal, it's actually internal as well. So like I'm conflicted in myself that I don't know what I want. And now I've got to deal with Michael, who also wants different things. And so now Michael has to deal with Grant, and Grant's wants different. That's the issue, is that we all have our own internal struggling, warring passions, and then everybody else has their own struggling, warring passions, and we got to somehow get along. And when we're immature, spiritually immature, we don't know how to do that. So here's what this might look like. I might say what I want or what I feel is more important than what other people want or what other people feel. All right. So now I value my wants, my needs, my feelings above Michael's. Okay, there's an issue there. You can also do this, vertically, not just horizontally. What I want and feel defines what's right and what is wrong. So now the law of God doesn't matter anymore because what I feel is more important than what I see printed on the page. All right, and so I'm not going to get on the soapbox here, but there was a pretty monumental decision that was made in the Supreme Court this past week, legalizing gay marriage in the United States. And I don't want to use homosexuality as a punching bag, because I don't think homosexuality is any worse than any other sin, but it is a sin. Okay, and so the issue with homosexuality is that we say, I feel this, it must be natural, so therefore God's law can't prohibit it because that's what I want. And really, we don't even have to point out homosexuality. It's just that's in the news right now. We could say about heterosexual lust or anger or envy or anything else. Like, I feel this, so I'm going to do it, right? And that really is at the core of this issue. We create divisions between one another because I want what I want, and I create division between myself and God because I want what I want, and I don't want to listen to what he says. And he says this: friendship with the world is enmity or adversity or discord between me and God. When I desire what I want and I elevate it over the Word of God, whatever it is, okay, it doesn't have to just be homosexuality. Again, not a cardinal sin, okay? It's all the, what is the saying? The flooring is level at the foot of the cross, right? We're all equal, okay? Whatever I want, whatever sinful desire that I elevate, no matter how natural it might feel, it puts me at odds or enmity with other Christians and with God, all right? So spiritual immaturity causes divisions. It values its own opinions, it values its own passions, and it also flaunts its own accomplishments. How many of you know a person who's real quick to talk about themselves, right? So anytime you have a story, they gotta say, oh yeah, I had that happen to me too, right? Or, you did something really cool and you're just really excited to tell them about it, and they gotta cut you off and say, no, this is what happened to me, right? We really want to flaunt our own accomplishments. And so when Paul talks about, this is a passage that's really easy to misunderstand because it's a metaphor. When he talks about in verse 12, if anyone building on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, that kind of stuff, my mind immediately thinks, okay, that stuff is bad stuff, right? Because all of it is bad stuff because that stuff is not going to last. We know that for eternity, there are more important things than gems, okay? But what it's actually talking about is, there's a metaphor that he's building because he's talking about us being the temple of the Spirit. He's comparing it actually to the temple that was actually built in Jerusalem, okay? And the temple wasn't built with wood and straw. The temple was built with stone and marble and beautifully overlaid with gold and precious gems. The priests actually wore what was called an ephod. There were all these precious stones in there. So the imagery is actually not a negative imagery Because if you think about, too, like the process of smelting gold, like gold has to pass through fire, and then it becomes more perfect on the other side. The fire burns out the impurities. So actually, it's really a question of worth. What is the most valuable things that I bring to to build on the foundation? It's a metaphor, and it's tricky. But Paul is saying that some people are going to add things to God's kingdom that last for eternity, and some people are going to bring things that are going to burn up. And that's why he says, like, we're all going to pass through the fire. The one who's brought important things is going to, he's going to receive a reward. The other person is not going to go to hell because he built on the foundation with straw or wood or something like that. But his contribution was not as meaningful because he was more invested in himself, or he was more invested in, socio-political stuff. He was less concerned about God's kingdom than he was about the earthly kingdom. So that's the idea here, okay? And when we are in the frame of mind that we are like really either like politically active or even active in ministry, it's easy to sometimes begin saying, I've done a lot. I'm a really good person, and begin to flaunt our own accomplishments, and instead of being willing to say, I'm just a steward or a servant like Paul does, who planted and watered. It's God. God is the one who makes something worthwhile out of what we bring. Right? Does that make sense to you guys? You guys with me on that? All right. So here's our evaluation question. Okay. Here's our evaluation question. Does drama follow you? All right. So we're talking about causing divisions. Does drama follow you? And can I just be really, really harsh with you guys? If drama follows you, it's not the other person. If drama follows you, it's not the other person. If you look back and all you can see is the steaming wreckage from all these relationships where that person hurt you and that person hurt you and that person hurt, and it's time to consider your part in that. All right? And we want to look at it through a different lens, because when we point fingers and have this victim mentality where everybody did something wrong to me and that's why this relationship is not intact anymore, it's self-condemning, because you're just the expression, you point a finger and three more point right back at you, right? That's the idea here, and this is the way we want to look at our relationships with other people. Look at verse 16. Live in harmony with one another. Don't be haughty. Don't be proud. Associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Some of this sounds familiar from Proverbs, right? Don't repay anyone evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all, and if possible, so far as it depends upon you, live peaceably with all. Now, I'm not saying if you have a broken relationship in your past that it was necessarily your fault, but Paul tells us that we should do everything within our power to restore. That doesn't necessarily mean that my friendship has to be there anymore, but make sure that I did what was right. Make sure that I apologize, that I did what was honorable. I'm not returning evil for evil. I'm not assuming that I was the one who was in the right, but I'm going to humble myself to the point where I reach out and make sure that I've done everything possible to restore that relationship. If drama follows you, it's probably not doing that. You're probably not doing that. And I'm not pointing fingers at anybody in this room at all. But sometimes we have that idea that every time something, a relationship ends, whether it's romantic or a friendship, by the way, not just talking about one or the other, that it's all the other person's fault. And you kind of surround yourself with people that can also say, yeah, it was that person's fault. But we need to be conscious that we are evaluating ourselves, our hearts in the matter, because we're only responsible for me. I can't control what that person does, but I am responsible for what I do. All right, so last point. Am I immature? Spiritual immaturity is the absence of spiritual wisdom. It means to be unteachable. It means to not be able to progress, in my understanding. It causes divisions. And last thing, spiritual immaturity picks favorites. These things are all kind of interconnected, but this is why they're saying, I want Apollos, I want Paul, or Cephas. He names another Peter there as well. And this is the passage. This is where I wanted to go with Nathan. When we talk about picking favorites, we're not just talking about picking favorite teachers, or I'm only going to listen to Pastor Phil. I'm not going to listen to Justin or Pastor Jack or whoever. This is the passage that Nathan had earlier, where he talks about don't show any partiality to anybody. For if a man, verse 2, wearing a gold ring and fine clothes comes into your assembly, and a poor man in shabby clothing also comes in, if you pay attention to one who wears the fine clothing and say, you sit here in a good place, while you say to the poor man, you stand over there. Verse 4, have you not then made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? When we pick favorites, we also gravitate toward the people who seem like they're going to be responsive to the ministry that we're going to do. Some of the guys and I were just talking earlier tonight about The hardest thing to do is perhaps to minister to somebody who doesn't acknowledge what you do for them, or who just throws it in your face, right? It's easy to minister to somebody who maybe can't repay you, but is really like thankful and gives you a lot of gratitude for it. But to like serve somebody who's gonna like, you know, repay your kindness with meanness, that's a little more difficult. But we can't do that. We can't choose to pick, you know, which people we're gonna serve. We have to be, as Christians, willing to serve anyone and everyone. And I forgot to load it up. Can you find for me, I got this really quick video. It should be under, if you go to the Finder, or I'm a Mac guy, sorry, the Explorer window, under videos, there should be a video called like U2 busking in the New York subway with Jimmy Fallon. Yeah, I knew I'd get you guys are like U2, boo. Jimmy Fallon, yeah! U2 was my favorite band growing up, by the way. But that's not why I picked this video. This is actually a really good example. Is it in there?
It's under what?
It should be in the videos folder. I meant to load this up earlier. And it's called something like U2 busks in New York subway, Jimmy Fallon, and pull the one up that's edited. And this is actually worthwhile. And it's a fun video because it's YouTube. But are we missing the cord for it?
Yeah.
All right, you know, don't worry about it. We'll, if you can load it up, we'll show it at the end because I'm like done. But so I won't. Should I give it away? Should I tell you guys what it is, or should I save it? Save it. All right, I'll save it. So, we'll move to our evaluation question, right, and then we'll go back. Oh, can you click into the PowerPoint for me? There we go. So we're going to check all that apply here. This is our evaluation question. Do you listen more to some teachers than others? Do you purposely avoid certain people, or do you only serve people who return your kindness? These are questions that can evaluate your spiritual maturity level in that. We don't get the option as Christians to respect only our favorite teachers or leaders. We don't have the option of serving only those who are kind to us. Jesus actually said that we should forgive our enemies, right? People that actually repeatedly do things wrong to us. Micah 6:8 talks about how we're supposed to be caring for the widow and the orphan, people that can't help themselves, and we should also be willing to sacrifice for others even at great personal cost. There's this great example in 2 Corinthians actually where Paul talks about the Macedonian church he says in their extreme poverty gave abundantly to help the needs of others. So even at great personal cost, we should be willing to serve others. We don't get to pick favorites. That's what the spiritually immature person does. Those of us who desire to be more like Christ, to be spiritually mature, cannot have that mentality. Are we good? Did we find it?
I haven't found it, but I don't have the audio cable for it.
Oh, we don't have the audio.
Yeah.
Dang it. All right. That's okay. So let's wrap up. Am I immature? Here's our evaluation question. Spiritual immaturity is the absence of spiritual wisdom. To be spiritually immature is to be unteachable, unwilling to learn, and spiritual immaturity causes divisions. Spiritual immaturity picks favorites. You guys all good with that? All right. I'm not telling you how to be spiritually immature, by the way. I'm telling you that this is how we evaluate where we are with this and how we can stop it being immature. So I'm going to pray, and then you guys will be free to go downstairs. We got volleyball set up. If anybody has any questions or want to talk about anything we talked about tonight, feel free to grab me. So let's pray, and you guys are free to go.